Okie dokie, everybody. So we are here with another foot reading video. Happy November. For those of you that have been following, make sure to like, subscribe, and share if you're interested in foot reading. And also to continue the conversation, we have the Foot Reading and Reflexology online community group on Facebook, also affectionately known as FROC, that you can find me as well as other reflexologists and foot readers from across the world to help you learn how to read the feet. So join that group, and without further ado, let's get into the pair of feet that we are going to talk about today. Lots of fun stuff, new stuff from the other videos, not necessarily a repeat of some things you've seen, but a lot of new stuff that is unique to this pair of feet that I can't wait to talk about. So it's going to be really fun. Let me share my screen real quick. That's the screen share sound. Okay. And foot reading. 11, 14, 17. So here are the feet. Yes, this is the plantar surface of the feet, so the underside sole of the feet, but we also have a dorsal surface picture, so we're going to be getting to both of those in this foot reading video. And let's kind of dissect these areas one by one. Okay, so blowing up the feet just a little bit, you can see a little bit better, which is why I love this screen share that we're doing, because you can really start to see some toe separation, some callousing, some lines and horizontals on 4, the roundness of the heels, all things that we're going to talk about. But really, and this is for those of you who are professional foot readers out there and reflexologists out there, and maybe if you've watched the webinar on how to generate a foot reading report, like getting good quality photos is really important. This isn't the best quality photo, but you can see as we zoom in that the details become more clear. So even if it's not the best quality, make sure that it's a large photo so that you can really zoom in and get those details under control. Okay, so the first marker, obviously, we've talked about this multiple times. It's a personal favorite of mine since I have this marker as well. It is a separation between the big toe and the second toe. What does this mean, Sam? Well, let me tell you. So this is affectionately known by me as the mark of the overthinker. When we see space in between the big toe and the second toe, the big toe representing horizontal zone 1, vertical zone 1, and then the second toe representing horizontal zone 1, vertical zone 2, we have the influence of the head space and the influence of the heart space, and there being space between those two areas. So mentally and emotionally, what this means for us is these people tend to be very much in their heads, and they separate that internal mental world from the rest of their outside experience. So these are the kinds of people where you're having a conversation and you can just almost hear their wheels turning on a regular basis. And 9 times out of 10, it has nothing to do with the conversation because their mind is just so strong and so active, almost out of control. But it's created almost a life of its own. And that mark of the overthinker is something really easy to spot, just to kind of recognize somebody who has a very powerful headspace happening. This can work to a disadvantage. It does mean that the person tends to detach very, very quickly. They tend to go very ice cold very quickly. But from a physical standpoint, it's also really significant because space here gives us this idea of there being a separation of sorts between the physical headspace and the physical kind of chest shoulder area. So with this mark being present, there's going to be a lot of tendency for referring pain between the head and back to the shoulder, and the head and back to the shoulder, and this kind of volleying of tension between these two sections of the body, because there is no kind of congruence. The head is very much in its own space, the chest and shoulders is very much in its own space, and they don't really talk to each other that much. That's what that separation really means, that there's both a physical and an internal gap with this person between the head and heart space and then between the physical head and heart space. Okay. Our next marker, as you can see, is this lovely bit of kind of pronounced ball of the foot and callousing. You can even see on that left foot, not your left, but looking at the client's left foot, there's that almost crescent moon of shedding skin, which is absolutely beautiful to see. We can talk about that slight significance as well, although when we think of markers that really make it into our top 3, this would not be one of them. But anyway, so we have this pronounced ball of the foot in line with the big toe. Not necessarily in terms of like a bunion formation. We'll see on the dorsal surface as well. Not really a bunion formation that's present, but it is very pronounced. And that pronunciation means that internally this person has a lot of emotional pressure that they tend to bottle up. Not to the point where it's created something physical like a bunion, but definitely that tendency to kind of stuff things. And we'll see additional markers down the line that confirm that kind of analysis. But also pressure in the physical chest. So the ribs will constantly feel tight, the pressure in the chest physically, kind of with either restriction in the chest due to anxiety or just not being able to take a full breath, just feeling like there's too much weight or pressure in the chest area, both from a physical and a mental emotional standpoint. Okay, now let's get to the marker that really makes it in the top three for me. So mark of the overthinker is fine, and then pressure in the ball of the foot is fine. This, however, is a marker that I would personally bring to the forefront of any kind of consultation discussion, and something that is very near and dear to my heart because in Western society, especially, but as we start to get into bigger and bigger cities, and this idea of food becomes more and more important as we become more and more detached from our farm to table lifestyles that we've kind of evolved with. Here we have this kind of dehydration of what would be the lower digestive reflexes. Horizontal zone 4, you can see actually at the proximal head of the fifth metatarsal, bringing that bony landmark all the way across. We can see that dryness really doesn't go far above that. It doesn't go into the upper digestive stomach area. Instead, it stays in that horizontal zone 4, letting me know that this is definitely a lower GI issue. And this marker of dehydration gives us a literal interpretation of dehydration in the gut. So the need for probiotics, the need for watery foods, the need for foods that are easily digestible because the lower GI is definitely feeling a little bit more weak and fatigued, all very appropriate right now. In fact, some of that kind of head and neck separation and some of that emotional pressure could be because of that underlying lack of digestive support, which is fascinating to consider. When we think of areas in the feet that are overpronounced, there's always going to be a corresponding area of weakness or lack to balance that out. And here we see that. We see that kind of cry out for the body to really say, hey, nourish me, nourish me. And it's only in that horizontal zone 4 space. So really consulting with this individual as far as diet goes, maybe even going for like a colon hydrotherapy session, something to really kind of clean the slate, start from scratch, and really start pumping in some core vital nutrients into that lower GI. Okay, so here we're gonna take these three markers, kind of table them, not talk about them anymore because there's one marker in particular that I wanted to have a whole nother slide just to talk about because it is that pronounced. Okay, so clear the slate. Here we are. Here's the whole picture of the feet. Now, what I want to bring your attention to is this, the heels. I have seen a lot of heels in my day, and these are oddly round, would be the best way to say it. So much so that they almost have a glassy appearance. They just have so perfect and slightly pressured, almost like a water balloon shape to them, which is not necessarily normal. So when we think of the heels as representing the lower body, this kind of round shape, this pressured shape, we can see tendency for thickness and callousing, especially around the outside. There is stagnation happening in the lower body, which we'll definitely see when we flip up the dorsal picture as well. But noticing how the heels, these feet are very dynamic, not super dynamic, but you can see that the ball of the foot is really wide. The toes have pronounced curvature. We see the arch is high. We see the heels also as an extension of that, have that denseness, that heaviness. And those heels really give us this idea that the feet in general are holding way too much tension. The lower body as a whole is just too dense, maybe too fluid filled. I'm kind of giving away some of the things that we're going to see on the dorsal surface as well to validate all this. But looking at the heels and kind of comparing and contrasting what I've seen, I mean, the heels are definitely holding on to a lot of stuff. So physically, leg congestion, but also from an internal perspective, the heels represent our sense of security and how we're moving forward. So when we see kind of a congealing, or again, that analogy of the water balloon, like it's just too full, yeah? This would mean that the person is very safe and settled with their sense of security and how they're moving forward. There's a lot of buffer. We can think of it almost as like financial buffer to kind of round off the edges and make any kind of life situation that may be floated this person's way a little bit more softer, a little bit more benign. But there's this idea that, there's not a lot moving. So when we think of that sense of security and moving forward, there's not a lot of momentum here. In fact, this person might even be feeling a little bit stuck in a rut, like they're sitting on a pile of cash and they don't know what to do with it. But at the same time, physically, like the legs just aren't moving. Sitting for long periods during the day can do that. But also this idea of just horizontal zone 5 stagnation is the general theme. Just wanted to point that out. Really, really cool stuff. Okay, now, let's go to the dorsal surface. So here is the dorsal surface, and some of you who have been following me on Instagram at Foot Whisperer Sam have seen this because I took a clip of it and I posted it early just as an additional lesson because we have some fun stuff to talk about here. So notice how when we look at the dorsal aspect of the foot, the big toe is really straightforward and has beautiful shapeage. But then as we go to toes 2 through 5, they all seem like they're bowing would be the best way to say it. So when the toes like this seem to be curling forward, not necessarily in the form of like a really sharp claw or hammer, but just a general curling, a general bow, there's still a flavor of neck issues here, but not necessarily neck impingement. So if we think of like a hammer or a claw toe with really sharp and contracted toe shapes, that is not what we're seeing here. We're seeing a gentle roundedness to the toe. We're seeing a curling, not necessarily a really sharp impingement. So not really bad neck issues, but just the general flavor of like maybe a slight kyphotic posture starting to happen, which is what the toes represent, kind of that head and neck bowing forward in terms of postural collapse, but nothing that's really set in stone, just a general tendency. This is, from a mental emotional standpoint, what I like to refer to as a shy toe formation. The toes are kind of ducking. Like if you think of somebody who's holding their head a little bit lower in a conversation because they really just don't feel comfortable saying what's on their mind, that's definitely what's happening here. The big toe is out in front. They're very clear mentally on their thoughts and opinions. But as we start to talk about some of the more personal things like feelings and emotions, family, career, sense of security, everything starts to curl inward and they're not as vocal. So it's very very much a shy curling forward of the toes that we can really see kind of an emotional personality flavor starting to reveal itself. But I don't know if you guys have already caught the next marker. Anybody catch it? So did you see the difference between the right ankle and the left ankle? It is dramatic, very dramatic. So you can't really see it as well when we look into the toes, but as we start to go into horizontal zone 3 and 4, especially closer to that ankle, we really see that fluid congestion as piling up on the left side. So this is that idea that the heels were trying to convey to us before, that the lower body has gone stagnant. It seems to be a more recent development because it is on the left side. Whenever somebody has symptoms that are left side dominant, it's always an increase in more present stress, versus if the issues are more right side dominant, it's past issues that are still being processed by the system. Also left side issues. So we would think of swelling happening in the left leg, left hip, left lymphatic system. But also more recently, emotions have been running very high. That's the literal translation of fluid. Whenever fluid starts to stagnate, it means emotions are building. Fluid is a marker that indicates emotional hypersensitivity. And so its presence really gives us this kind of impending tidal wave or tsunami effect. Just things are starting to kind of emotionally spiral out of hand from that standpoint. And that's really what we see as one of the final markers for our feet. So we started with this idea that this person had some emotional pressure issues and that they also tend to compartmentalize their thoughts and their feelings. And there are more recently sort of some family fatigue situations happening, but overall they tend to be very grounded, almost unmovingly so. They definitely have that mountainous quality. But then when we get to the dorsal surface, it's like they're just not talking about their stuff. They don't really have anybody to share it with. They don't really have anybody to share with that family fatigue, that digestive issues. They're normally taking care of everybody else, and they're the mouse in the background that's just silently observing and taking second chair all the time to make sure that they don't make waves. But the waves are coming, is what we can really deduce from this swelling on the left side. So definitely pay attention to that as a really core marker whenever somebody has spontaneous fluid development on one side of the foot or on both feet. It's definitely that rise of the tides emotionally. That can be a very quick and easy marker to spot, but also physically a little bit trickier because it does have such a strong internal component and tends to be so spontaneous. Okay? And those, I believe, are our markers for today. Yay! Okay. So that was our quick foot reading session. I hope that you guys enjoyed the video. As always, you can check the details below in order to connect with me. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are, if you have comments, or maybe if you'd like to send in your foot pictures to be featured in one of these videos, or just to chat. We can totally keep you anonymous and not kind of post you all over social media, although I do love to do that. Definitely join the Foot Reading and Reflexology online community group on Facebook. Join us for our webinar. We're having a webinar this Sunday at 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on the top 10 pathologies that reflexologists should know. So lots of fun stuff here at the Institute. Stay tuned, subscribe, like, share the video. I'll put up a couple links right about now, and I will see y'all later.